Today, we're going to be talking about ecological civilization, a concept which has been developed by David Korten, our guest and presenter today. And David says that we seniors have a great deal of power that we can yield and wield to help our civilization adapt. David is the co-founder of Yes Magazine and an emeritus part of that organization, former board chair. He's also an American author, lecturer, student of psychology and behavioral systems, formerly of the Harvard Business School, a prominent critic of corporate globalization, and he has published many books, including When Corporations Rule the World and The Great Turning from Empire to Earth Community. He also has an article in the most current version of the Third Act magazine, which I sent a link to out before this meeting, and we have copies of this available free at the front desk of the Senior Center, and the white paper, which is also linked to in the materials that we sent out, and we'll make it available also afterwards. David, thank you very much for joining us. We very much appreciate your time today.
Well, Reed, thank you. This is absolute delight on my part to be part of this discussion about Bainbridge, the Senior Community Center, and the human future. And as I understand it, this was all prompted by my recent article in For the Love of Earth in Third Act magazine. It's been an interesting experience preparing for this because it's given me cause to further reflect on the distinctive responsibilities each of us face in our third act, otherwise known as elderhood. As elders, I realize we bring distinctive knowledge and experience to the community in which we live. And many of us enjoy the special privilege of retirement incomes that give us the free time required for community service. As a choice-making species in deep crisis, we humans have at this moment a special need for the wisdom of elders who have experienced humanity's history of false choices as these choices have played out over the past 70 years and more. Choices that have step by step stripped away the relationships of love and mutual care essential to life's existence and well-being. I'm now 84, and my distinctive life experience has given me some extraordinary opportunities to experience the dysfunction of establishment institutions that bear significant responsibility for creating our current human crisis. And I've also seen firsthand the consequences of these failures in the environmental devastation, war, extreme and ever-growing inequality, authoritarian governments, predatory capitalism, and global pandemics as their destructive impact on people's lives have played out in our now inseparably interdependent world. We cannot return to our pre-COVID, pre-Putin past, nor should we want to. Rather, we must acknowledge the lessons of our past as we work locally and globally to create together a future that works for all of life. I continue working with colleagues around the world who recognize the need for a dramatic coming together of humanity around a vision of the world that is within our means to create, if we so choose. Most of these colleagues are in their elder stage of life and act not for financial gain or personal recognition, but merely out of their love for the beauty and creativity of life and earth, and their belief in the human potential. I assume that some of you have read my white paper on ecological civilization, From Emergency to Emergence. Wave your hand if you've read it, just so we get some idea. Okay.
Did you have it in Yes Magazine?
No.
Okay, there was something in there that you put and I cut it out. Okay.
Yeah, there was a, I mean, obviously there's been a Yes issue on ecological civilization, and this piece is posted quite a number of places on the internet. And I should also stress at this point that the concept of an ecological civilization did not in any sense originate with me. It has a long history and considerable global support. The paper I've written to try to pull together the key themes is a product of many global discussions that I've had the privilege of being engaged in. So the foundational message is quite simple. It's profoundly serious and hopefully very clear. Humans are on a path to self-extinction because we're destroying Earth's capacity to sustain life as we know it. Science now tells us that unless we put ourselves on a track to deep transformation by 2030, our human impact on Earth's regenerative systems may become irreversible. Now, I'm assuming that this does not come as news to anyone here on this conversation. So I'm not going to waste your time repeating the statistics. I assume that you also know that the problem is of our own human making because we have lost sight of our true nature as intelligent, loving, living beings born of and nurtured by a living Earth. What I'm going to focus on today is what gets less attention. That is the opportunity created by this crisis to achieve a human transformation consistent with our human potential as a species with the unique capacity to choose our future together. Now, I'm not talking about a fantasy future of effortless, self-indulgent luxury. I'm talking about real possibility consistent with our true nature. And be clear that the issues are complex, and anyone who claims to have simple solutions or ultimate answers demonstrates they don't really understand the problem. But if we so choose, we might find our way together by learning through local action and global sharing. Now, my own understanding of the choices at hand comes less from my formal academic credentials than from a series of distinctive life experiences from which I will quickly share some key lessons. I grew up here in the Pacific Northwest, immersed in the beauty and wonder of nature, in a family with a successful local music and appliance business run by my father. And my father taught me that the purpose of being in business is to serve the community in which you live. You may find that's one of the lessons that we seem to have forgotten. For the first 30 years of my adulthood, I was on a mission to end global poverty by helping the world's poor countries become middle-class democracies, which I grew up believing the United States to be. To that end, my wife, Fran, and I lived for 21 years in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, encountering the wondrous variety and creative potential of the world's people. Among many other activities, we established a modern business school in Africa. I advised heads of population and family planning programs throughout Latin America and Asia, and advised heads of US foreign aid programs throughout Asia and the Pacific. Fran became a legend in the foundation world for her work in helping local communities control and manage their local irrigation and forest resources. During this experience, Fran and I gradually became aware that the economic policies the United States was advancing in poor countries were driving people from their land and their families and reducing them to lives as itinerant farm and sweatshop labor working for starvation wages to grow the power and fortunes of dictators and their handmaidens at great expense to people and earth. In 1992, we returned to the United States to inform our own people what we had learned abroad. I began working with many of the world's leading intellectual activists dedicated to liberating poor countries from the devastating impact of deeply misguided US development policies. Fran and I first settled in New York City on Union Square between Wall Street and Madison Avenue, which is where I began writing what became the international bestseller When Corporations Rule the World. As we were settling into New York City, I participated in a 10-day retreat in the Philippines with a small group of Asian colleagues who headed some of Asia's most influential nonprofits. Our purpose was to share insights into the Asian development experience. Our discussion led to an image of money spreading out across Asia and consuming life everywhere it touched. The image was so vivid. But how could it be? Money is just a number. It has no awareness, no agency. How could money be destroying life? It took me several days before it finally hit me. The damage is the impact of money on the human mind. Create a world in which people must possess the numbers we call money to access their essential means of living. Then focused on acquiring those numbers, we will forget what it means to be living beings on a living earth. And that is what has played out over the past 70 years. And it is why, to use the technical term, we are now in deep shit. I earned MBA and PhD degrees over 7 years as a student at the Stanford Business School, and I taught for 5.5 years on the faculty of the Harvard Business School. This experience involved countless assessments of the financial consequences of varied managerial choices. Over those nearly 13 years, however, I do not recall ever hearing anyone ever mention the obvious truth that money has no intrinsic value. It is just a number with no meaning outside the human mind, and it will be worthless on a dead earth. We organize as a now globally interconnected species to grow the numbers we call money without regard to social and environmental consequences. The result is ever-growing inequality, violence, social disintegration, loss of trust in our institutions, and disruption of Earth's essential regenerative systems. This is a result of a collective human choice based on a fundamental misperception of our human nature. We're now waking up to the devastating consequences. And we now have less than a decade to acknowledge our error and begin reorganizing in ways consistent with our true nature as self-aware living beings whose well-being depends on the well-being of one another and the living earth. Many early human cultures, including many of the African peoples from whom all humans have descended, recognize the interdependence of life. Some of us know it by the South African word Ubuntu, which translates, I am because you are, or I am because we are. The dominant human societies of the past, most recent 5,000 years mostly forgot this basic truth. I find hope in the fact that science is now refreshing our human memory and taking our understanding ever deeper. Quantum physics tells us that relationships, not particles, are the foundation of what we experience as material reality. Biology is finding that intelligent life exists only in diverse communities of choice-making organisms that together create and maintain the conditions essential to their individual and collective existence. The social sciences are finding that the most equal societies are the healthiest, and that humans get our greatest satisfaction from mutually caring relationships with other living beings. Now, tragically, in the midst of all of this, most academic economists continue to cling to their fatally flawed mythology that community is an illusion, that humans are ruthlessly individualistic self-seekers, and the belief that if we each maximize our individual financial return, we will achieve the optimal result for all. We have tested this deeply flawed premise on a global scale. and it has failed dramatically. For the past 30 years, I have resided in the United States, mostly on Bainbridge Island, working globally with many of the world's most extraordinary intellectual activists, seeking to understand and find alternatives to our current devastating path. It is increasingly evident that far from calling us to sacrifice for the well-being of Earth, the emerging vision of an ecological civilization calls us to embrace our current challenge as a win-win opportunity to actualize our human desire and potential to love and to care for one another and Earth. If we simply relieve ourselves of forms of consumption that are ultimately self-destructive, we could meet the essential material needs of all people while remaining well within Earth's limits. Obvious examples of what we might give up without loss include war, consumerism, planned obsolescence, long supply chains. The essential transformation requires that we rethink purpose, power, and procreation. I call them the 3 Ps: purpose, power, and procreation. The purpose of a functional human society is to provide all people with material sufficiency and spiritual abundance while supporting the well-being, beauty, and creative unfolding of Earth's community of life. Societies best fulfill this purpose when power resides in communities of place that empower people to fulfill their responsibilities to and for themselves, one another, and Earth. And every society must support life's continuous procreation. This requires care for the living systems by which Earth regenerates air, water, and soils while maintaining climate stability. It requires supporting ourselves in managing our human numbers and distribution while supporting continual human learning and evolution as caring individuals, families, and communities. We have much to learn from life using tools of science that were beyond the means of our ancestors. We now understand in ways hidden from our ancestors why life can exist only in communities of diverse living beings engaged in the conscious, fundamentally cooperative exchanges their individual and collective well-being requires. Take our most intimate experience of life, our own body, the vessel of our individual consciousness, and the instrument of our individual agency. The complexity of the living, intelligent cooperation required to maintain just one human body defies belief. Your body and mine is comprised of 30 to 40 trillion, be clear, that's trillion with a T, living cells that in turn depend on the support of some 39 trillion microbial cells, including wondrously varied forms of beneficial bacteria, viruses, and fungi. These trillions of cells are supported by 100,000 miles of blood vessels, that's enough to reach around the Earth 4 times, that provide each cell a continuous supply of oxygen, nutrients, and water while collecting and disposing of their waste. So each cell can thereby make constant decisions essential to our individual existence. And this is just one human body. Earth is a vastly larger and more complex organism that survives as a living being only so long as its countless individual organisms self-organize to create and maintain the conditions of climate, pure water and air, fertile soil, and much else on which Earth's life depends. And it did not just magically come to be. It was a difficult journey of mutual learning over 3.7 billion years, as life evolved from rudimentary microbes to living organisms of ever greater physical and cognitive abilities. Humans, living beings able to shape the future of life on Earth with conscious collective intention, are currently life's most advanced expression of this capacity. But we have yet to achieve the wisdom required to use our distinctive abilities responsibly as a now globally interconnected species. Take note, nowhere in the relationships between members of Earth's non-human species do we find equivalents of the human institutions of money, government, business, religion. It is humbling to acknowledge that our bodies and Earth accomplish all this without such props. And it is reassuring to recall that until recently, humans did as well. Our distinctive ability to reshape our relationships with one another and Earth resides in our ability to make conscious collective choices relating to culture, institutions, technology, and infrastructure. Choosing to transform these props in the ways now required is a very ambitious goal, but entirely within our means. We created them, we can change them. Can we do so with the required speed? We will know only if we try. We are experiencing a hopeful convergence in human understanding of the imperative to join as one in facilitating the emergence of a true civilization, an ecological civilization dedicated to the well-being of life, built on a strong foundation of community. The defining challenge is rebuilding the relationships of community from the bottom up, a process that requires distinctive engagement and contributions from those of us who have available time and relevant experience. Success will require collective effort and learning involving all generations working together. We each have our role in meeting this challenge, including those of us in our third act years. We each bring a lifetime of skills, experience, and wisdom. Many of us also have the discretionary time and income afforded by retirement. This gives us the freedom as elders to apply these assets in our final years as a gift in support of the youngers who must lead in creating what will follow. What, in your view, is the world we seek? How might we best express that on Bainbridge? What might be the role of the Bainbridge Senior Community Center? How might we best learn from and share the lessons of our experience with others? So Reed, I hope this gives us a basis for a lively discussion. And back to you.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you for the laying out of the challenge before us. It's serious, as you say, and a little intimidating. But you also talk about the idea of starting at base level, that the idea of self-organizing is a very local activity. And I wonder if, to get us started, you might be able to reflect a little bit on some examples that you've seen of that kind of local activity, either in individuals or people that you've worked with, or any community things that you might have rubbed up against. I know there's some mention in your white paper of the Thriving Cities Initiative as an example of some cities that are doing that, which might give us a clue about where our discussion might start here on Bainbridge.
Yeah, I mean, that is such a big question. Of course, the reason I was involved in founding Yes Magazine was to provide a communications vehicle devoted to telling those stories. And I hesitate to get in that there, first of all, because it's not really my specialty. You know, this needs so many minds. My particular skill is in helping people see connections that they don't otherwise see until pointed out. the number of examples that are playing out are endless, and they're constantly changing. What actually might be useful would be for people to mention here, and we might start out with Fran, things that are actually happening on Bainbridge at this point, that are all part of this larger process dealing with, how we transport our energy, our health systems, every aspect of life on Bainbridge, and how those come together. I'm wondering, Fran, might you want to comment on just quickly on a few of the things that you're involved in that fit within this larger picture of civilizational transformation?
Okay. So one of the things I'm involved in is something called Bainbridge Greenways, which is a unit of sustainable Bainbridge. And the goal here is to make Bainbridge a truly bikeable, walkable city and promote public transportation. So it's very timely because tonight our city council will vote on the results of a 2-year process of planning sustainable transportation on this island. And I'm going to go to that council meeting, and I am going to speak up and request that they form a sustainable transportation commission so we continue to have citizen input. So, one of the hopeful signs, I think, is in many cities across the country and across the world, people are really working on making those cities far more amenable to active transportation. And another milestone in our state is that we just passed a $16 billion 10-year plan for moving Washington, in which for the first time in our history, it invests more money in various forms of sustainable transportation than it does in highways. So all these years, we always have emphasized cars, cars, cars. And for the first time, even though that package has plenty of money in it for highways, it has more money in it for light rail, bus systems, bike systems, etc. So I think that's only one of the things I'm involved in, but let me just stop there, because certainly an element of ecological civilization is learning to get around, meet our needs for being able to move in a way that consumes the least possible energy and creates the most community, which these forms of active transportation do.
Yeah,
and when you're talking, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, it's virtually every aspect of life that we need to be rethinking. And of course, things around agriculture, housing, how do we care for our elderly when we get to beyond the point where we can actually care for ourselves? It's the reason I like the frame of civilization, because it evokes the sense that we're talking about everything. And it's why I'm reluctant to get into examples around the world, because there is so much happening. And what, the things Fran mentioned, what makes them really interesting is not just on Bainbridge, but these are things that are happening every place. And so much of the innovation is taking place at the local level, rather, as our national political system is so hamstrung.
Right. And I guess that the reason I was asking for that kind of example, I know we also spoke with a group called Refashion Bainbridge, which is working on promoting the idea of reusing clothing, or making clothing, or avoiding using clothing that includes microplastics. That's the kind of thing that we make a decision on a day-by-day, Amazon by Amazon purchase way, And so, I mean, those are the kinds of ways that I wasn't looking for a grandiose solution,
Yeah.
because what you were saying about self-organizing, these things sort of, just like our bodies, happen organically, I think is what you're pointing at. I mean, we have to promote the organism.
And all of it is about shifting the power that we have concentrated in global transnational corporations and financial systems, bringing that back to the community, where we are in direct relationship with nature and the living systems of Earth that we have to now restore back to full health in ways that at the same time meet our own needs.
Is there anybody watching and participating that would like to open their microphone and make a comment or pose a question? Cap, you just posted something. Would you mind opening your mic and sharing that?
Well, I was just interested in stimulating some conversation about you could call it the phenomenological process of engagement and hope making, hope generating. And so I just know for myself over the last couple of years that finding a way to get engaged has been really, really important to dealing with my own climate anxiety, to put a common term on it. And so a lot of my work right now has to do with finding ways to engage young people in that draw them into a more hopeful stance and a more engaged stance. So those things are connected. If you give up hope and become nihilistic about all of this, then that's bad. So
yes. Well, and I think that was the point in your remarks, David, that we won't know unless we try, and we can't try unless we approach this with an attitude of hope.
Yeah, this is one of the fundamental lessons I learned long ago. We need to be aware of the failure. We got to be clear on the reasons for the failure. But that alone is a loser. We're not going to get out of the problem unless we've got a vision of an alternative. And I also want to mention that I'm struck that, we've got such an extraordinary population on Bainbridge. It is a generally elder population, but we have here so many extraordinary individuals with extraordinary experience and skills working in various organizations around the world, solving our deepest problems. And we need to be very conscious of the mobilization of that talent in ways that recognize what we can be doing here to be creating examples and lessons for other communities around the country.
Did you
Maria?
already? Oh, sorry. Did you already mention the Islandwood conference this Sunday on clothing? Did you already discuss that?
No, I just mentioned that Refashion Bainbridge is one of those groups, but yes, there's a day-long conference.
Day-long.
And at Islandwood, dealing with these issues of fashion and clothing, and mending and repairing. And so if you go to the Islandwood website, you can find details on that, or you can go to Sustainable Bainbridge and look for the Refresh Bainbridge logo, and you'll find that information as well. Marcia, you have a comment or question?
Yes, and actually you've touched on some of it in the preceding comments, but I've been a sort of a fringe member of Zero Waste for many years, which is part of Sustainable Bainbridge. And one thing that strikes me, and this is along the lines of what is successful, is that particular group has an energy and a passion and a creativity that just keeps regenerating itself. And that's the kind of energy I think we want to tap into to carry things forward in a new way. It is energizing to do that work. It is not work. It is community building and positive, and that to me has all the characteristics of what we're looking for. The other thing I think, David, you just mentioned is that I think it's so important that we have a positive vision. And in my mind, what I've carried all along is that when we get out of our individual cars, when we become more community and more reliant on each other, we will have stronger relationships, and ultimately we will be happier people for that. And so instead of looking at downsizing or giving up our private luxury car as a deprivation, I think that emotionally we are going to be in a far better place when we are back to stronger community. And I'd like to hold that vision out there instead of this, we're running from all the bad things that we've done.
Thank you very much. Mary Ann, you have a comment or question?
I was really struck by David's imagery of money spreading out to the earth and really being nothing, you know. And I had this moment this morning when I was meditating that the goodness that we share is some kind of streaming subconscious that's almost like truffles in the forest. It's underneath the surface, and you can actually feel kindness when you are around kindness. And I just felt like, you know, there's things underneath the surface too, besides all the stuff up in the surface that is so discouraging. And I wanted to share my meditation thought.
Thank you very much.
I want to note the beauty of that, one of the things I've very much in my mind and rethinking what we call economics is the connection between economics and our spiritual religious understanding. And just exactly what you just laid out. That it's part of understanding how fundamental this shift is. We must understand the sort of the material and that aspect of it, but we're not going to get there unless we also have a spiritual awareness of our spiritual nature and purpose.
Barbara?
Yeah, I want to thank you for the favorable comments about zero waste. I'm a longtime volunteer with Zero Waste, and I'm on the steering committee. And we have a farmers market booth one Saturday a month from April through September. And I have to say, people are so much more engaged, have become more engaged over the last year or so. And one of the booths that we did, we have a different theme every month. And our most enthusiastically received one last year was Ditch the Plastic, where we just had a lot of alternatives to plastic for everyday things in your house. And people were just interested. They didn't know about it. They wanted to know more. And it just is very fulfilling to be able to engage in those kind of conversations and provide information, and also to see how much concern there is about these things and people's willingness to learn more and make changes in their lives.
And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about what that's felt like for you, Barbara, as you've adopted these things, as you've learned ways that you could do things differently, sort of the emotional or spiritual transition for you.
I noticed that I experience much more gratitude in my life these days. And it's also a way of getting to simpler choices and just getting down to what is more real. I feel like all the stuff that we get is just so superficial, and not only is it toxic, but it's just a terrible waste on many levels. And so I think as you learn to do with less, there's more room in your life for other things and to appreciate other things and people more.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we might hear from Rick Freeman, who I know is working on trying to put together a climate cafe, not so much focused on actions that we can specifically do, but this emotional thing that we were just talking about, the idea of coming in touch with some of these feelings and trying to generate hope. Rick?
Yeah, I think for me, the purpose of the Climate Cafe is for people to have a place to vent their opinions, their attitudes, their feelings, and not so much to be a force for generating hope, but for bringing awareness to people of where their feelings are. And that's not to say I don't want hope to come about, but I think we have to get down to the very root spiritual cause of everything, and that is coming from within each individual. And they're most likely, I've found in my experience of working with people as a spiritual counselor, to do that is when there's a venue for them to be heard without judgment. And that's the beauty of a cafe model, that everyone is welcome and all perceptions are welcome. And as they're received, then people begin to hear themselves better and get to understand themselves better. Out of that comes hopefully a recognition eventually that we create our own reality, but we do it from within first. And the outer world is a reflection of the collective inner world. And that's, it seems like a simple thing, but we don't change the outer world by just shifting the chairs on the Titanic. We change it by looking at where our attitude is and where we're putting our direction. And to me, that's the essence of spiritual living. That is, where is my attention going? In some traditions, they use a phrase, attentive prayer, and or attitudinal prayer. And that's not begging or asking for something. It's simply, where is my attention going? Where is it now? And catch it throughout the day. Where is my attention going? And the more we do that, the more we can come to an acceptance of what's here and now, right now. And there's less grasping for the outer, grasping for more things out there. And more we get to know community within ourselves. And that leads to a willingness and the ability to engage in community, interdependent community. But it begins with each one of us as an individual cell of the whole body. And that's my practice and has been for most of my life, but particularly the last 20 years of my life. And it's how I look at the world each day. And we can shift things around, but if we don't change our attitude fundamentally as each individual cell, then we won't accomplish what we need to accomplish. So
Thank you, Rick.
So you're welcome. There's the Climate Cafe will happen at the Senior Center on April 2nd between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. If you'd like to join us, we have room for 30 people at 6 tables. And if you'd like to join us, please contact the Senior Center and register for that event. We'd love to see you.
And if it fills up, I'm sure we'll do another one.
We will. As you showed me, the system has a way of collecting additional names beyond the 30. So, yeah.
So, right. So if you're interested and you find out that it's that we're full, please register anyway, and then we'll know to keep in contact. We
And
also have go ahead.
One more thing. If you're a part of a group that would like to promote such an event within your organization, I'm more than happy to provide whatever training and guidance necessary for you so that you can do that, and then you can spread it to other people. So any way we can do this to spread the possibilities, I'm willing to participate.
Yeah, this came out of a discussion we were having. Rick helped lead a death cafe discussing the recognition of our own and our family's mortality, and coming to deal with that in an honest and straightforward way, and applying some of those concepts to the same kind of challenge that we face with climate catastrophe that we're in the midst of now. David, any response to some of these comments?
I just say that I'm just sitting here absolutely thrilled by the depth of what people are contributing. This is, you know, this so fulfills and exceeds anything I hope that we would be bringing out today. And these are exactly the kinds of conversations that are essential to our ability to move ahead and create a society which is really about fulfilling our human potential as a very special species with very special responsibilities on a living planet, a living Earth, that so far as we know from all our scientific knowledge is still the only planet that we have identified with reason to believe has the conditions essential to life as we know it. It's extraordinary responsibility, and we're talking about the process by which we can actualize that possibility. Thank you.
Thank you. We have talked about in your article on Third Act, you talk about setting up ecological civilization conversation groups or discussion groups. I know that we had a meeting yesterday discussing Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And there were some people who thought that they might like to explore that book in more detail over a period of time. And Kat Jovic had volunteered to help us get a ecological civilization discussion group maybe started here. We had
about what the book is about. What is that book about?
Braiding Sweetgrass.
Yeah.
Braiding Sweetgrass is Dr. Kimmerer is a biologist, botanist, scientist who also is native, and she has brought together her traditional understanding of life, of the world, of the universe as a caring place that's based on beauty and connection, and connected that with her scientific learning. And she shares in this book some of the ways that that represents itself and the ways that we can change our, drop the scales from our eyes, if you will, and see the world as it really is, and that would change our behavior and attitude towards each other and towards all living things. I think, anyone want to add to that about Dr. Kimmerer's work? Yes, Mark.
I was in a full moon drumming circle in Southern Oregon for 12 years. It met for 20 years. And there was no money. We just met at houses. We were at fires outside. We danced, we sang, we chanted, we had potlucks. And it went from Ashland all the way to Cave Junction. And it was just beautiful. It was just this, yeah, I miss that up here. So, yeah.
Yeah, I could add a comment about the significance of these books like Braiding Sweetgrass and their deepening of our understanding of life. It's important to recognize how recent that focus in biology was.
Yeah.
Is. And I had this extraordinary experience back in 1997. I was at a conference in Spain, and this young woman, well, this woman of Asian ancestry came up to me and introduced herself, and she says, "I'm Dr. Mei-Wan Ho. I'm familiar with your work. I'm a microbiologist, and I think what I'm doing may be relevant to what you're doing." And she proceeded to point out what she meant by a new biologist. She says, a conventional biologist takes a living cell, grinds it up, studies its chemical composition, and thinks they've learned something about life. Because I take living cells and study how they exchange nutrients, energy, information, and water. And that was the foundation of what I laid out in my presentation about the complexities of life. But at that time, just a bit over, it was less than 30 years ago. What she was saying was absolutely radical within the field of biology. That biologists were giving a lot more attention to studying dead cells. And the fact that we now have just this incredible supply and of these pieces helping us to understand our bodies, the trees, the forests, the land, every aspect of life. It's an incredible breakthrough. And of course needs to be the foundation of all our thinking about our institutions, our technology choices, and so forth. So I just want to, being aware of how extraordinary this breakthrough in understanding is, because it's part of what creates the possibility of the current transformation.
And of course, one of the things that Dr. Kimmerer says is it's only new to the Western mind in a way.
Yes. Yes. But at the same time, we need to recognize that while traditional societies had the basic concept, our modern scientific instruments allow us to actually observe things that it was beyond any possibility of them observing. So it takes the understanding so much deeper and gives us more basis for understanding the kind of transformation we now need to navigate.
So Kat, I wonder if you might share a little bit about what we might do if we were to, some of us here or anyone watching this video later and wanting to participate, how we might, what we might do as a group in starting to talk and then act together, might have Martha's dreams come true.
Thank you, Rita. And I echo what David said. This is absolutely amazing and wonderful to hear all of the contributions you're making. Rick, I too am a conversation cafe person, and I think it's a wonderful format for people to have their voices heard, and to think out loud together without any expectation that there's going to be a to-do list when we end. It's really very personal, very reflective, very much a connecting experience. So I think ecological civilization as a concept has there's so much opportunity to dive into that conversation from a personal and a spiritual level. And, without necessarily our activist hat on, but I also believe that action will come from some of those conversations, because it does change, in some cases, people's hearts and minds. And in other cases, it just allows us to go deeper and figure out what it is we want to do with all of this knowledge and understanding and awareness we've created. One of the things that impresses me about this conversation is we've talked about individual spirit. We've talked about activism. There's also advocacy that comes from being together in community. The kinds of advocates that Zero Waste has produced, oh my goodness, coming together with common purpose. The affordable housing movement on the island, not without its controversies and its dilemmas, but there's a growing group of people around that. So I think advocacy is a big part of that. And whether it's advocating on a local level or advocating with the national government and our representatives there, because we need to change policy too at every level. So anyway, we've been talking with Reed about the possibility of having a conversation cafe on ecological civilization in a few weeks. And I'd like a show of hands to see who might be interested in taking this conversation to another level. Great. Thank you.
We just are putting a kind of a marker in the ground, and if there are better times, it will evolve. We'll just open the door and see what happens. Kat and I talked about April 12th at 1:30, and I'll start to promote that in our activities. Start out as a Zoom meeting, but we may actually get into face space before too long. And as the weather improves, it'll be even easier to schedule things around here.
Well, as we think about these books that begin to give us a very different understanding of life and how it operates, as David is suggesting, we've mentioned Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, but there are so many others that are out there now that really give us a new perspective. And I found a couple of them I mentioned in the chat is The Soul of an Octopus. And right there in the title, you have a very different view of life, because for centuries, millennium, we have been maintaining that only humans have souls. But now she's suggesting, wait, an octopus has a soul. So it's kind of like, wait, once you do that, you have opened up a whole new understanding of the spiritual and choice-making basis and consciousness of many living creatures. So another one I mentioned is Peter Wallaben's book, The Hidden Life of Trees, which is all about what's happening underground and the amazing communication that is going on between trees, and of the connection with the fungus that send nutrients up the trees, and trees send nutrients down, and they can warn each other of impending danger and all kinds of capacities that we have never, at least we Westerners, have never attributed to something like a tree before. And I acknowledge the very different perspective that Native Americans have generally brought to these understandings, and certainly the notion that trees might communicate with each other would be a more ancient and present one in Native American perspective.
And there's The Hidden Life of Soil too. That's the other book too. Yeah.
Cap, do you want to throw any suggestions in here for folks? I know you mentioned so many books, so little time.
If there's anything I would offer is just to draw our attention to the fact that what we are rediscovering is actually deeply ancient awareness. And so just a couple of connections with that. I mentioned the book by Mircea, Eliade, which I ignored when it was given to me in the curriculum in my undergraduate time, but I've been rereading it, and it's astonishing because it's a tour de force of religious history, and the point that he makes, the argument he draws through that remarkable account has to do with exactly the issues we're talking about here. But he characterizes this as an eternal struggle between the sacred and the profane, the sacred awareness and the profane, distractions or engagements necessary to material life. It's an amazing book. And then another example of that I think folks might be interested in is there's a marvelous book by a poet and translator named David Hinton called Hunger Mountain, in which he's a translator of ancient Chinese poetry. And one of the points he makes in the book, and he embeds it in his lovely walks up and down Hunger Mountain for 20 years or so, is that classical Chinese poetry is written in a language, an image-based language that retains a more holistic interpretation of the nature of existence, not just human, but more than human existence. So the only point is to say that I think we're reawakening to something that has a very long history in human consciousness, and it helps us become aware of the way in which we turned away from ways of seeing the world in generally in the last 300 or 400 years, that is a characteristic of our age and our culture more than it is a characteristic of human awareness in of itself. That was jumbled.
Yeah.
But I'm
Well,
doing
no, I get it. I mean, the idea that that this is not irretrievable, that this is a distraction, basically, a very dangerous and perhaps perhaps life-ending distraction, but it's a distraction from what we knew as part of the larger interrelation of all existence.
One thing that happened to me yesterday, I just think it'd be good if we all went out into nature here. We went to Manitou Beach, and the tide was at 0, and it was just mud completely as far as you could see. It was like, I've never seen anything like that before. And I was with an 8-year-old and my daughter and her mother, his mother, and there was at least one other child running out there, and dogs running out there, and parents running out there, and it was just glorious. I just feel like this island is like amazing in what it has. I came from Southern Oregon, where we were always on alert for fires. You needed to be ready to leave your house within 15 minutes every year for the last 3 or 4 years. 45 minutes to the east, 2,300 houses burned down a year ago, September. To the south, 1,800 acres. And Bainbridge Island's 40,000 acres. So just think 4 burning. And then to the west, it was 220.
We just lost your microphone there. I don't know what.
Okay.
There you're back.
So to me, you guys really live in paradise here. You really don't get it, maybe, that you're like the last, place in the United States that isn't burning up or, floods galore. So I just think going out and looking at the beauty that's here is really important. That's enough.
Thank you very much. Yes. It's interesting because, of course, that climate catastrophe is everywhere. And although it is absolutely gorgeous here, we are at risk of rising waters, and the weather is changing here as it is everywhere. And so plants that were growing here aren't, and plants that weren't growing here are starting to grow here. So it's it is for sure something that we are not immune from.
I hope you don't get poison oak quite so much. Yeah.
Fran, your hand is raised, and then Mary Ann.
I just want to add that we are at risk of fire here too. And sometimes I think our love of trees, which I share, can get in the way of the need to recognize that many of our forests are very prone to fire.
Absolutely. Mary Ann.
I've read a bit of David's articles, and one of the things that I really enjoyed was the concept of egonomics. And that said so much to me. It's like, I need now to question my consumption. Is it egonomics or whatever? So thank you for that.
Well, egonomics versus economics.
Yeah, it's interesting that how explicit it is among economic theorists that the neoliberal economics, the kind of standard current economics, is part of that neoliberal frame of there is no community. There are only individuals. And that's absolutely fundamental to most of our economic theory. The other thing that's so fascinating is that kind of modern economists pride themselves on economics being what they call a values-free science. Totally objective, no values. But of course, what they do is they place the total value on money, and that's their idea of being values-free. And that, of course, is exactly what drives us into this destruction of life to grow money. And one of the great challenges of our time is we need think of economics as we need an applied science that is about how to apply the very deepest of our knowledge and understanding to the choices that we need to make about how we live as a now global interconnected society. And it's just breathtaking how the contrast between the true economics, the economics we need, and the egonomics that has been driving us towards self-extinction. So big challenge there. That's one of my next, well, it's a current priority. How do we begin to recraft that?
And based on what we're talking about today, that ego to eco is also a person by person thing. It's what we're talking about exactly.
Yeah.
Barbara?
Yeah, I'd like to see a conversation started and then continued and expanded, kind of dovetailing on what David just said about the true cost of each of our consumer decisions. You know, we don't consider that at all. And so that's why we have, the single-use plastics, everything is just linear, headed to disaster. And we're not thinking about all the implications of every choice we make for everything we consume, which can be quite exhausting, but I think it's necessary because we haven't been doing it. And it's led us to this very unfortunate place we're in.
And to some degree, being courageous enough to say something when somebody else is suggesting a wasteful use. That's often a problem for me. It's like, oh, well, we need to get some, we need to get some water bottles here at the senior center because so people can get a drink of water while they're, having their exercise class. It's like those kinds of things come up every time we turn around.
I'd be happy to have a conversation with you about those kinds of policies at the senior center. And just this is an aside, the Rotary Auction is going to resume this year. And for the first time ever, the Rotary Club will not be providing single-use water bottles for the volunteers there. People will be responsible for bringing their own container, and the Rotary will be providing various water stations throughout the event. I mean, that's huge.
Yes, that's exactly that's the example, and Zero Waste probably gets some credit for opening the eyes about that for the Rotary. And when we had the chili feed here this year, we didn't come up with those. We used to sell single-use water bottles for $1. Now we put out the water cooler and said, help yourself.
Yeah, that was great.
A little, but they're very small actions. But if we don't take the small actions, the big ones won't follow.
I just wanted to introduce another topic that I think might be of interest to folks. And I was particularly interested in hearing David talk about this. So I teach over at UW, and so I hear a lot of rhetoric from both my beloved colleagues and my deeply respected undergraduate students about capitalism. And in its uniformly pejorative and I would say problematic in this way. Though I don't disagree with any of the critiques, and I really appreciate how articulately David has laid this issue out, and I also like the language about ego and eco. But the point is that I'm trying to raise with my undergraduates and with my colleagues is, yeah, we live in a deeply exploitive, rapacious economic model. But how do we get from here to where we want to go? Because the dilemma that young people face is, how do they make a living? And how do they make a living now when things are so crazy? And you just saw the article this morning in the Seattle Times about the housing crisis and what that's driven by, which is the concentration of wealth, of course. So I'm really interested in models that help us imagine how we begin where we are with the realities of how hard it is for young people, especially, to support themselves in this crazy economy? And how do we get to the kind of eco-economics that David is envisioning? So the transition models, what do they look like?
You know, that's a terrific question you raise. The starting point, in my view, is, you know, in a way, I share the criticism of capitalism, but at a deeper level, the issue is the question of how do you define capitalism? And when we get into capitalism, we get stuck into, well, the main thing we know as an alternative to capitalism is socialism. So either, you know, is our only choice everything's owned by transnational corporations or everything is owned by the state? Well, obviously that's an error right there. The thing that we need to be moving toward is community control. One of the things that's always so fascinating to me is the idea that Adam Smith was the father of capitalism. But if you actually read Adam Smith carefully, his ideal of the market was a marketplace that looks a whole lot more like our farmers market than it does our global economy. And in fact, he's very explicit. He gets very nervous if even, you know, two farmers got together and decided to cooperate with each other. That's the first step toward a monopoly. And that does bring out this fundamental question. Power is key, and the issues of ownership and how we define ownership and the distribution is absolutely foundational. And I think the general model is the more ownership is shared, and the more it's grounded in community, neither national governments nor transnational corporations, that's closer to what we want. And it will be varied. There will be some that are purely private enterprises, and there'll be cooperative enterprises, and it will be very mixed, and in a sense, very complicated.
So start a co-op or go into business for yourself is the advice you might give CAP students.
Yeah, but we also have to recognize that we have, you know, with our monopolistic world and Amazon and so forth, we make it extremely difficult for those businesses to survive. You know, in terms of the family business I grew up with, you know, my brother took it over and it ran it very successfully for years, but ultimately it went out of business. I mean, there was no way that you could stay in business competing against monopolies like Amazon. And that's you know, that's part of what we're up against. I was trying to think of the other piece of that particular puzzle. Oh, you know, when we talk about ownership, I mean, this is a larger issue in our culture. We're always talking about human rights, and that includes, you know, the rights of ownership, or the rights of essentially the capitalist. What we almost never talk about, even, you know, in our UN documents and so forth, are our responsibilities. Mm-hmm. And the fact that there is no, if you begin to take it apart, there are no rights without responsibilities. And that's where we get into this recognition of our interconnections and our interdependence. So the amount of rethinking, rediscussion that we have to navigate is just incredible at the most foundational levels. But of course, everything that we're talking about here in the community, I didn't hear anybody mention anything about rights. You know, we got to protect our rights against the government or whatever. We're all talking about the things that we could be doing to make this a better community, which is all part of embracing our responsibilities and our recognition that none of us can survive here alone.
Does that give you something to take back to your colleagues, Cap?
Yeah, well, it certainly does, and we're all reading David's monograph, so that's all good. I think it's often it's a struggle to imagine how it might look in their lives. So, you know, if the kind of thing that I think is helpful, I have a colleague at the university, and she and her husband run Spring Rain Farms up in Chimicum. And it's an incredible place that her husband actually worked with, I'm blanking on the guy's name who was responsible for the Green Revolution in India. David, you'll probably know him. But anyhow, it's a very sophisticated, you could call it permaculture approach to local family farm. But she supports it with her University of Washington salary. It's not actually quite viable in this economy where cheap food is, you know, you can go to Safeway and you can buy an avocado for $1.50. And anyhow, that's a bad example because we don't grow avocados here. But the point I'm making is that models of sustainable business that has one eye on the ecological issues and one eye on the family budget. Concrete models, examples of how people are making their way from where we are and with rapacious capitalism to some vision that looks a lot more like what David is describing in his monograph. I think those are really helpful to this young people, so that it's just not too abstract for them. They can kind of see, oh, you can go visit Spring Rain Farm, and then you'll see how it might look, that kind of thing.
Yes, and I know a young woman who's doing a lot of growing and canning and preserving while she's living on the island and putting together her she's in her early 30s, an example of how that might look. But it does involve a combination of having a little bit of dirt and an attitude that I'm going to spend my free time in this creative way that involves growing and canning and, you know, doing things that are not video games.
Yeah, Cap, I mean, any of you be aware that my white paper on ecological civilization is considered a totally public document. You can share it, distribute it. I didn't even care. You can put your own name on it and claim it as long as you don't prevent me from distributing it. There's nothing in there that is a private idea in any respect.
Yeah.
But I would also note, Cap, that you referred to the Green Revolution, which is a term that is usually applied to something very different than what you're describing.
Oh, absolutely. I understand that. And it's a deep
just
dilemma.
We need to all
also
be clear on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of India, the most extraordinary leader there on non-green revolution agriculture is Vandana Shiva, who's a lifetime friend and very close. She's actually visited us here in the past on Bainbridge.
Yeah.
Could you just to get the whole group understanding that there was an effort in Green Revolution to actually, the idea was to try to make agriculture more industrial in a way, right?
Absolutely. And so it was all based on chemicals and mechanization and so forth. And it was very much part of this process of driving people off of the land and off of control of their own means of living.
But the dilemma is that it produced a lot of food that saved a lot of people's lives. I know you've been in India, so you know what I'm about to say, and that is that guy whose name keeps escaping me. We all understand that.
Norman Borlaug.
Thank you.
Yeah.
He's
also killing the soil.
Saint.
Yes.
He's considered a saint in India. He saved us, you know, at least amongst the, you know, people I was interacting with. And the dilemma is that if you put that in the context of Garrett Hardin's views about the importance of population control, it's like it's a paradox. And so you produce cheap food that sustains people's lives, and then you have more people, and that it's like it's a dilemma.
Well, it's also the idea of not understanding the carrying infrastructure. We're going to solve it like a math problem. And we are too egocentric to recognize that we might not know what the consequences of our brilliant minds are.
But it's also a process of killing the soils ultimately, and reducing overall productivity. So we've had this spike in population that we now can't support as we twist it around. I mean, it's just an amazing set of interdependencies. And of course, you know, Fran and I, much of our long ago, we were very deeply involved in the whole set of issues around family planning and population management and policy and so forth. And that again is another such incredible issue, that the need to give people control of their reproduction. And yet the extraordinary resistance against that somehow that is a crime against God. Anyhow, on and on. But that's part of the rethinking of our procreation, and accepting responsibility in all these areas that we've just gone through, and working out what are the implications, and how do we assure that every child is a wanted child, and how do we maintain a balance between our numbers and the diversity of the rest of life, which is essential to our well-being as well as the well-being of the earth on which our well-being depends.
Which is your other P, purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
Martha had her hand up.
Yes, one thing we had in Southern Oregon, as far as community is concerned, is for the whole Rogue Valley is a directory, a paper directory of all the organic farms and people that were doing local everything. And it was really neat to just go, you know, you could do that for, maybe it exists here for Bainbridge Island, a paper directory of places.
Well, I do know that there are a number of growers in the non-paper directory, the not Dead Tree Society, called Kitsap Fresh, which is a number of organic growers who, and you could obviously purchase their products through Kitsap Fresh, or you could see where they are and visit them, or combination thereof. And many of them also are at farmers markets.
Well done, Reed.
Thank you all. It was a cooperative effort. I'll send out a note to this group about April 12th at 1:30, and if that time doesn't work, you can still ask to be included in conversation so that we can keep in touch and look at ways to connect and grow together. Thank you very much, David, for your time, your work on this.
Thank you.
David.
Thank you.